The anniversary dinner was perfect. A dimly lit room in one of the city's finest restaurants. The warm glow of candles reflecting off glasses filled with aged red wine. Mark and Julia sat at a table adorned with a bouquet of red roses. It was their 20th wedding anniversary, a milestone that seemed to promise a quiet celebration of their enduring love. Julia's smile never faltered as she raised her glass for a toast, her eyes gleaming in the candlelight. To 20 years of trust, loyalty, and love, she said. Mark beamed back, the corners of his mouth twitching with a nervous energy that Julia seemed not to notice. The waiter arrived with a perfectly plated dessert, but Julia held up her hand. "Before we continue," she said, her voice lilting with practiced calm, "I have something special for you, Mark." She reached beneath the table and pulled out a neatly wrapped package. Mark hesitated before accepting it. "You shouldn't have," he chuckled, his eyes darting between the gift and Julia's serene expression. "Open it," she urged, her tone unyielding yet sweet. The package contained a leather-bound photo album. Inside, page after page revealed photographs of Mark, caught in candid moments, embracing their neighbor, Anna. Images of stolen kisses in the driveway, secret lunches, and even a weekend getaway, all meticulously documented. The restaurant fell silent as Mark's face drained of color. Julia's voice...
Before I continue, my friends, I kindly ask you to subscribe to my channel. It only takes a second for you, but it's a huge boost of motivation for me to keep creating videos. I'd also greatly appreciate your comments. Thank you for your support. Now, let's get back to the story.
To her purse and pulled out a series of receipts, text message printouts, and a small recording device. "I had my suspicions for months. And then, when you started working late, frequently I decided to investigate. It turns out, Anna enjoys our anniversary just as much as I do." Gasps rippled through the restaurant. Patrons whispered to each other, their eyes bouncing between the couple and the growing spectacle. Mark glanced around, his polished reputation crumbling before an audience of strangers. Anna, seated with her own husband at a nearby table, froze, her fork slipping from her hand and clattering onto her plate. Her husband's face contorted with disbelief as Julia locked eyes with her. "Anna, dear," she said, her tone razor-sharp, "I trust you'll find someone else to ruin after tonight." Julia stood, her dignity intact, and turned to the crowd. "To those who wonder why women stay silent, this is why. But not me. Not anymore." She walked out of the restaurant, leaving Mark to face the weight of her revelation, his life, and Anna's, unraveling under the judgmental stares of everyone present. As Julia exited the restaurant, the crisp night air hit her face, sharp and refreshing like the liberation coursing through her veins. The crowd inside remained glued to the scene, a murmur of voices swelling behind her like distant thunder. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Tonight was about reclaiming the power she had silently relinquished over the years. Inside, Mark sat frozen, his hands trembling over the damning evidence still spread before him. His throat was dry, his mind a storm of fragmented thoughts. He made a feeble attempt to collect himself, clearing his throat to address the room, but the piercing glare of Anna's husband silenced him. "You spineless bastard!" Anna's husband, Greg, growled, rising from his chair. He was a tall, broad man with a quiet intensity, but tonight, the quiet had been shattered. "How long has this been going on, Anna?" His voice was loud, commanding, drawing all eyes to the woman now shrinking in her seat. Anna stumbled over her words, her cheeks flushed with humiliation. I can explain." "Explain," Greg's voice thundered. "Explain how you made a mockery of our marriage? How you dragged me into this mess?" His hands clenched into fists, and he took a step toward her, but then he stopped himself. Instead, he turned to Mark, his expression darkening. "And you," he spat, "you think you can destroy two families and walk away unscathed?" Mark stood abruptly, trying to muster some semblance of control. "Let's not do this here," he said, his voice low and desperate, his eyes darting toward the judging crowd. "Oh no, Mark!" Greg snapped, his tone venomous. "This is exactly where we do this. Right here, where everyone can see the man you really are." Anna finally rose, her voice shrill and panicked. "Greg, please, let's just go home and talk about this." "Talk." Greg cut her off, his voice quieter now but no less dangerous. "I've been talking to you for years, Anna. I've been patient, forgiving. But this is unforgivable." He reached for his coat and turned to leave, casting one final glare at Mark. "You're a disgrace. And you," he said, looking at Anna with cold finality, "can stay here with him. You're both exactly where you belong." As Greg stormed out, the restaurant seemed to exhale, the tension loosening but leaving behind a thick air of unease. Anna slumped back into her chair, tears streaming down her face. Mark, now fully aware of the irreversible damage, gathered the album and other evidence in a futile attempt to hide what everyone had already seen. The whispers grew louder, the judgment in every corner suffocating. Mark turned to Anna, his voice sharp and bitter. "Why didn't you warn me?" She knew. Anna glared back through her tears, her composure unraveling. "Warn you? Do you think I expected this? Do you think I wanted this?" For the first time, the cracks in their secret alliance became visible. It was no longer just a betrayal, it was a sinking ship, and both were scrambling for the lifeboat. But there was none. Meanwhile, outside, Julia hailed a cab, her mind swirling with a mix of emotions. Anger, sadness, relief. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing for certain. The burden she had carried for months was finally gone. As the cab pulled away, she glanced at her phone. Dozens of messages and missed calls from friends, family, and even Mark flooded the screen. Ignoring them all, she leaned back against the seat, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. For the first time in years, she felt free. Back at the restaurant, Mark and Anna were left to face the aftermath, the once celebratory atmosphere forever tainted. And as the diners resumed their hushed conversations, one thought lingered in everyone's mind. How quickly the facade of perfection could crumble, and how spectacularly. The fallout in the days that followed was swift and merciless. Julia's bold public confrontation had become the scandal of the neighborhood, spreading like wildfire through whispers, social media posts, and local gossip. Her meticulously planned revelation not only exposed Mark and Anna's affair, but shattered the carefully cultivated images they had built over the years. Mark found himself ostracized at work. The office, once a place where he commanded respect as a senior executive, had turned hostile. Colleagues avoided him, their polite smiles replaced with judgmental glances. Whispers trailed him in hallways, and projects he had been spearheading were quietly reassigned. It wasn't long before his boss called him in for a private meeting. "We value professionalism here, Mark," his boss said, his tone firm but measured. "But this situation has become a distraction for the entire team. I think it's best if you take a leave of absence to sort things out." Mark wanted to protest, but he knew it was useless. His once stable world was crumbling beneath him, and there was no stopping it. Meanwhile, Anna faced her own reckoning. Greg had filed for divorce within days of the restaurant fiasco, his lawyer delivering the papers to their shared home with clinical efficiency. The neighbors, many of whom had been friendly with her for years, now regarded her with thinly veiled disdain. She couldn't step outside without feeling the weight of their eyes, the silent accusations that followed her everywhere. Julia, however, thrived in the aftermath. After years of living in Mark's shadow, her bravery had earned her widespread admiration. Friends she hadn't spoken to in years reached out, offering support and solidarity. She even received invitations to speak at local women's groups about empowerment and reclaiming one's voice. But Julia didn't want the spotlight. What she wanted was peace, and to rediscover herself after 2 decades of suppressing her dreams for the sake of a man who had betrayed her. She began filling her days with activities she had once loved: painting, hiking, and even enrolling in a creative writing class. It was during one of these classes that Julia met Sophie, a spirited woman with a knack for storytelling and a shared history of navigating betrayal. The two quickly became friends, bonding over their experiences and their newfound freedom. "You're stronger than you know," Sophie told her one afternoon as they sipped coffee at a bustling cafe. "What you did at that restaurant. Most people would never have the courage." Julia smiled, her gaze distant. "It wasn't about courage," she said. "It was about finally realizing my worth." As the months passed, the dust began to settle. Mark's leave of absence turned into a resignation, and he eventually moved out of the neighborhood, unable to face the ongoing scrutiny. Anna sold her house and relocated as well, her once pristine reputation in tatters. Julia, however, stayed. The home she had shared with Mark was hers now, a space she was transforming into a sanctuary of her own design. On the day the divorce was finalized, she stood in her newly renovated living room, sunlight streaming through the windows, and raised a glass of champagne to herself. "To freedom," she whispered, her voice steady and resolute. The echoes of betrayal no longer haunted her. Instead, they served as a reminder of her resilience. A chapter in her life she had closed, but one that had taught her the true meaning of strength. And as she looked out at the world ahead, she knew it was hers to conquer. A year passed, and the scars of the ordeal had begun to fade, leaving behind a stronger, more determined Julia. Life in the neighborhood had returned to a semblance of normalcy, though her story remained a whispered cautionary tale. For Julia, it was a fresh start, unburdened by Mark's deceit or the weight of their fractured marriage. Her creative writing course had blossomed into something unexpected, a full-fledged passion for storytelling. Encouraged by Sophie and her classmates, Julia began penning a novel loosely inspired by her own experiences. It wasn't about revenge or betrayal, but resilience, capturing the journey of a woman rediscovering herself after years of neglect. On a crisp autumn morning, Julia's phone buzzed with an unexpected call. The number was unfamiliar, but curiosity got the better of her. "Julia Bennett?" a warm, professional voice asked. "Yes, this is she," Julia replied, her tone cautious. "This is Rachel Morgan from Blue Horizon Publishing. We received your manuscript submission, Phoenix Rising, and I have to say, it's absolutely captivating. We'd love to discuss publishing it." Julia froze, her heart pounding. She had submitted the manuscript on a whim, never expecting more than a polite rejection. "Are you serious?" she finally managed. "Completely," Rachel said with a smile in her voice. "Your story is raw, powerful, and incredibly relatable. We think it has the potential to resonate with a wide audience." The call set off a whirlwind of events. Within months, Julia was signing her first publishing contract. The book launch was a modest yet emotional affair, held in a local bookstore. Friends, neighbors, and even Sophie were there, cheering her on as she read an excerpt to an enraptured audience. The success of Phoenix Rising brought Julia a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just about the acclaim or the modest royalties. It was about telling a story that connected with others. Messages poured in from readers who shared their own experiences of overcoming betrayal and finding strength. Julia realized her story was no longer just hers. It had become a beacon for others. Meanwhile, Mark's life had taken a sharp decline. Struggling to rebuild his career and reputation, he had moved to a small town, where he lived in relative obscurity. Occasionally, news of Julia's rising success would reach him, a painful reminder of the life he had squandered. But Julia didn't dwell on him anymore. She had left that chapter behind. One evening, as she sat by the fireplace in her newly redecorated living room, her phone buzzed with a text. It was from Sophie. "Turn on Channel 5. Julia grabbed the remote, puzzled. The screen flickered to life, and there, on a talk show panel, was a woman holding Julia's book. The host was discussing themes of empowerment and healing, and the woman praised Julia's ability to turn pain into something transformative. Julia smiled to herself. Her story, her truth, had found its way into the world, resonating far beyond the boundaries of her once small and confining life. And for the first time in years, she felt not just free, but truly alive. As the flames crackled in the hearth, Julia raised her glass once more, this time to herself and the life she had rebuilt. She had been tested, broken, and betrayed, but she had risen from the ashes. And now she was unstoppable. As Julia's success grew, so did the ripple effects of her story. Invitations to speak at events became more frequent, ranging from book clubs to national conferences about personal empowerment. She traveled across cities, meeting people who had been touched by her book and inspired by her journey. Each interaction deepened her resolve to continue sharing her truth. One afternoon, while signing books at an event in New York, Julia was approached by a familiar face. It was Greg, Anna's ex-husband. He looked different, more relaxed, with a faint smile that hinted at newfound contentment. "Greg," Julia said, surprised but genuinely pleased to see him. "What brings you here?" "I heard you'd be in town," he said, holding up a copy of *Phoenix Rising. "Thought I'd get a signed copy straight from the source." Julia chuckled, taking the book from him. "I didn't expect to see you again. How have you been?" Greg leaned against the table, his demeanor warm. "Better, actually. After everything fell apart, I realized I needed to start over. Sold the house, moved to the city, and focused on my career. Turns out, it was the best thing that could have happened to me." Julia smiled as she handed the signed book back to him. "Funny how life works out that way, isn't it?" Greg nodded, then hesitated, as if weighing his next words. "You know, I've been following your success. It's remarkable, really. What you've done, how you've turned everything around. It's inspiring." "Thank you," Julia said, her voice softening. "It wasn't easy, but it was necessary." They chatted for a while longer, reminiscing about their shared ordeal and marveling at how far they had both come. Before parting ways, Greg handed her a business card. "If you're ever in the city again, let me know. Maybe we can grab coffee and catch up properly." Julia accepted the card with a smile. "I'd like that." Back home, life continued to flourish. Julia had started working on her second book, diving deeper into the themes of self-discovery and resilience. She had also begun hosting workshops for women seeking to reclaim their identities after betrayal, finding immense fulfillment in helping others navigate their own healing journeys. One day, as she organized notes for an upcoming workshop, Julia received an unexpected email. It was from Anna. The subject line read, "An apology, long overdue." Julia stared at the screen for a long moment before opening the message. "Dear Julia, I don't expect forgiveness, but I felt it was time to say this. I am truly sorry for everything I did to you. Watching your success has been both humbling and eye-opening. You deserved better, and I played a part in robbing you of that. I hope you continue to thrive, and I wish you peace. ***, sincerely, Anna." Julia read the email twice, her emotions swirling. She didn't reply, not because she harbored resentment, but because some wounds were better left in the past. Forgiveness, she realized, didn't always require acknowledgement. Months turned into years, and Julia's name became synonymous with resilience and reinvention. Her second book was an even greater success, cementing her place as a prominent voice for empowerment. And though life had taken her down a path she never anticipated, she wouldn't have changed a thing. One evening, as she stood on the balcony of her home, overlooking the glowing city lights, Julia felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had built a life she was proud of, a life that was entirely her own. In the quiet of the night, she whispered a silent vow to herself, to keep growing, to keep inspiring, and to never let anyone dim her light again. And with that, she stepped back inside, ready for whatever came next. Years later, Julia found herself standing in front of a packed auditorium. It was the largest audience she had ever spoken to, a crowd of over 2,000 people who had gathered for a prestigious international conference on personal growth and empowerment. The spotlight shone brightly, illuminating her poised figure as she stood behind the podium, her second bestseller, Unshaken, proudly displayed on a banner behind her. The applause quieted, and the room fell silent in anticipation of her words. Julia took a deep breath, the faint hum of the microphone amplifying her steady voice. "Years ago," she began, "I sat in a restaurant, celebrating what I thought was 2 decades of loyalty, partnership, and love. But by the end of that evening, my world had collapsed. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, and even myself was turned upside down. The audience listened intently, some nodding, others wiping away tears. Julia's story had become a lifeline for many, a testimony to the power of resilience. But here's the thing about hitting rock bottom, Julia continued, her gaze sweeping the room. It gives you a foundation to rebuild. That night, I learned one of the most important lessons of my life. When someone tries to diminish your worth, it's not a reflection of you. It's a reflection of their own brokenness. She paused, letting the words sink in. I didn't know it at the time, but that betrayal was the catalyst for my transformation. It forced me to confront truths I had ignored for years. It made me realize that the life I thought I wanted wasn't the life I deserved. The room erupted in applause, but Julia raised her hand gently, signaling for silence. I'm not here to tell you that healing is easy. It's messy, painful, and often feels endless. But I'm living proof that it's possible. And not just possible, to thrive beyond it, to turn your pain into power. Her speech ended with a standing ovation. As the crowd cheered, Julia felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The life she had rebuilt was more than a personal victory. It was a beacon for others to find their strength. After the event, Julia mingled with attendees during a book signing. Women and men alike approached her with tearful gratitude, sharing their own stories of heartache and renewal. Among them was a young woman who clutched Julia's first book tightly, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Your story saved my life," the woman said. "I was ready to give up after my divorce. But your words reminded me that I'm worth fighting for." Julia's eyes softened, and she reached across the table to take the woman's hand. "You are," she said firmly, "and don't ever forget it." Later that night, Julia returned to her hotel room, the city skyline twinkling through the window. She reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from a devastated wife confronting betrayal in a crowded restaurant to an internationally recognized author and speaker. Her phone buzzed with a message from Sophie. Asterisk, "You were incredible today. Let's celebrate when you're back." Asterisk, Julia smiled and replied, Asterisk, "Absolutely. Drinks are on me." Asterisk, as she set her phone down, Julia poured herself a glass of wine and stepped onto the balcony. The cool night air wrapped around her as she gazed out at the bustling city below. She had made peace with her past, but she also knew it was the fire that had forged her strength. Life had tested her, broken her, and rebuilt her in ways she never imagined. Now, she stood tall, unshaken, unbroken, and unstoppable. Raising her glass to the stars, Julia toasted the life she had reclaimed. "To growth," she whispered, "and to every step still ahead." 5 years later, Julia stood at the opening night of her first art exhibit. The gallery buzzed with excitement as visitors admired the paintings that lined the pristine white walls. Each piece was deeply personal, a vibrant depiction of her journey, of heartbreak, resilience, and ultimately, joy. Her artistic talent, rediscovered in the aftermath of her divorce, had blossomed into yet another outlet for her boundless creativity. She moved through the room, her confidence radiating with every step. Familiar faces from her past mingled with new ones. Sophie was there, beaming with pride, along with Greg, who had become a trusted friend. Even some of her old neighbors had shown up, their initial curiosity about her public unraveling replaced by admiration for the woman she had become. One piece stood out among the collection, a bold, fiery abstraction titled Ashes to Light. It was the centerpiece of the exhibit, a raw and powerful testament to the moment her old life burned away, leaving space for something greater to emerge. As Julia approached the painting, a reporter stepped forward, microphone in hand. "Julia," the reporter began, "your story has inspired so many. You've become an author, a speaker, and now an artist. Looking back, do you ever wish things had turned out differently?" Julia tilted her head, a thoughtful smile playing on her lips. "It's tempting to wish for an easier path," she admitted. "But I wouldn't change a thing. Every painful moment, every betrayal, it all led me here. Without it, I wouldn't have found my voice, my passion, or the life I was meant to live. The reporter nodded, captivated. What's next for you? Julia looked around the gallery, at the faces of those who believed in her and the art that had become an extension of her soul. I've learned not to plan too far ahead, she said. Life has a way of surprising you. But I do know this. I'll keep creating, keep growing, and keep inspiring others to do the same. As the evening wound down, Julia found herself alone in front of Ashes to Light. The gallery was quiet now, the hum of conversation replaced by the soft echo of her footsteps. She reached out, her fingers grazing the edge of the frame. It wasn't just a painting. It was a reflection of her journey, a reminder that even the most devastating losses could give rise to something beautiful. For the first time in years, she felt an overwhelming sense of completeness. The woman she had become was strong, free, and full of purpose. Julia took a deep breath, her heart steady and light. As she turned to leave, she glanced over her shoulder at the painting one last time. From ashes, she thought, comes light. And with that, she stepped out into the cool night, the next chapter of her life unwritten but filled with infinite possibilities.